Hi, everyone, and welcome to today's podcast with Dave Smith, President at Inflow Analysis, and myself, Nicki Catchpole, Senior Analyst at TBR. Today, I can't tell you how pleased I am in welcoming Michael Wenderoth as our guest. Michael has a long history of advising, coaching, and helping people to challenge themselves in his role as an executive coach. And if there's ever a time when we're in need of his perspective reorienting advice, I think it really goes without saying that it's now. So Michael, welcome, and thank you so much for joining us today from across the Atlantic, from Madrid, Spain, which is, I think, our first European guest.
Thank you, Nicki.
Awesome. So, Nikki, since we started this series, I guess way back in March now, right? We've definitely had
Mm-hmm.
quite the array of guests from a variety of different industries and different roles. So, a real diverse set of voices, which is good. And we do find that sometimes the best way to get to the heart of complex issues is to ask seemingly simple questions, right? So, with that, Michael, I'd definitely like to first get your background, but also throughout this one question, really, what are the most important things for leaders to keep in mind at a time like this during COVID?
First, Dave, thank you for inviting me. And by way of a very brief background, I am an executive coach, and I work with leaders, top business schools, and companies around the world. Really, I get executives and leaders to rethink their assumptions about power and authenticity to become more effective at work and leadership. Prior to becoming, a professional coach, trainer, educator, I served 20 years in senior roles with multinationals, China, Silicon Valley, and Europe. But now I am focused on executive coaching and I work with leaders around the world. Mm-hmm. So your first question, and I like the simplicity here of what are the most important things for leaders to keep in mind at times like this. We are in very interesting is not even the word moment right now. There's this notion that I think is mistaken, that you need to be taking care as a leader of everyone on your team, and you've got to have all the answers. But I think there is an overlooked step that comes before taking care of everyone else. And you don't have to have all the answers, but, and this is an important but, you do need to step up and communicate in a way that doesn't badly backfire on you and can actually make things worse. So let me explain and just kind of quickly unpack those two ideas. First, the number one thing you need to do is take care of yourself. And let me just state very clearly, taking care of yourself first is not being selfish. Because it's pretty simple. If you don't take care of yourself or you are a personal disaster, how can you possibly take care of others or be able to even present or act in a way that reassures people? And it's like that analogy. We've all ridden airplanes. Hopefully we're going to get back on them soon. But if the airplane's going down, the instructions are very clear. First, put your oxygen mask and life vest on. Then you'll be controlled and you're in a position to help others. We all know this, but so many of the executives and leaders out there, and particularly times like this, aren't doing it. They are not doing it. Second, this point on communicating to others, you need to know as the leader that people are looking to you, and you need to do what the situation calls for. What do we want to see from our leader? And, if you look at the evidence and you look at the research out there, we are drawn to people who we see as leaders who, project or seem to be in control of the situation. In short, they know how to reassure us. This doesn't mean you have to get up and lie, but you might have to act a bit of the part. And make no mistake, leadership is a lot about acting. It's about performance. And your job, and we can talk about different leaders. I think there's some great examples. We go look down in New Zealand. You go look in Atlanta, and fantastic, very powerful speeches that were given earlier this week. But, your job is to ensure people, that you're up for managing and you're going to make it through the crisis. the company, the people, the city can survive. So getting up to speak to others, if you're looking bewildered and worried, saying you have no idea what's coming, that's not terribly reassuring. You know, you might feel that personally, but expressing it so bluntly can backfire. You can acknowledge doubt, that there's uncertainties, but it's part of your job to give a vision of how you're going to get through it. You know, I said, let me just give two quick examples and just summarize it here. But you look at, you know, Jacinda Ardern of New Zealand. Pretty straight talking, empathetic, and even knows how to interject humor. And she delivered a hard message. I mean, that the lockdowns in New Zealand were quite draconian. And so she sold an unpopular lockdown program because people believed in her. Mm-hmm. I mean, was she feeling that was absolutely the right thing to do? I think no leader has the answers. But I mean, she said it. I wrote down her phrase: stay at home, break the chain, and you will save lives. And on a similar front, I know we're in the middle of the pandemic, but you cannot ignore the national tragedy that has happened this past week. There are no words to express it. But if you look at the two speeches, I think these are the most powerful ones, and you can send a link to your listeners, of rapper Killer Mike and Mayor Keisha Lance Bottoms. These were amazing speeches. They were angry, and they channeled anger. They did not, you know, shield that, but they channeled it in an incredibly effective and powerful way. We can talk about that more later, but I think these are two things I want to hold up and get people to think about. So summarize, you know, to your original question, number one, take care of yourself first, or you can't take care of others. Mm-hmm. And number two, realize people are looking to you, and you need to instill in them some vision of the way forward, even if you personally, you know, 100% don't have the answer.
Thank you, Michael. I really appreciate you kind of stepping outside the bounds of what this podcast was originally created for, which was to address the immediacy of what we were all feeling under COVID, and to make it directly relevant to, you know, how the world has shifted even more into uncharted waters. I think the English language is going to need to invent some new words to kind of account for some of the things that we're all mutually going through. You know, and thinking of what you just unpacked there, I'm hitting on some key points of, you know, control and calmness in leadership, confidence, as well as, you know, the injection of some personalized messaging, even if it happens to be impassioned or have, you know, even a tinge of anger or frightening aspect of it. It makes a leader seem more human and relatable. Now, how is this similar or different to, you know, how you would coach someone, you know, pre-today versus how you would advise someone, you know, if you had a meeting with them later this afternoon?
So it doesn't really, I mean, COVID, the situation going on, doesn't change the fundamentals of, you know, how you step up as a leader in a crisis. I think that there is strong research and evidence that we can look out there of what resonates with people, what moves people. And you need to be looking at that. You, as a coach who's worked with a very diverse set of leaders, men, women, different ethnic backgrounds, different countries, different industries, the situations we face and we as people are more similar than we are different. That may come as counterintuitive from a guy who's lived around the world, and we like to point out differences. But people want to be connected to. We do, for better or for worse, look to people who seem to have strength and can show that. So as a coach, I see a lot of those patterns. I draw from the research, and I would say that those are very applicable to all the situations that you find yourself in. And I would say, you know, a lot of people will also look to coaches to say they draw from their personal experiences. I have had plenty, you know, particularly in my line and general management roles. I worked in healthcare where mistakes cost lives. and in different countries where the rules may be somewhat different. But I think, again, we're more similar than we're different. You can extend a lot of those learnings, but I'm cautious too not to extend my personal experience directly on clients or other people. There's variables at play. Every situation is different. And, you know, the national tragedy going on right now, it's, you'd have to be measured in what you're saying, because there's been 80 years of the stuff going on, and, you know, shooting off at the mouth and invalidating how someone is feeling is not the right position to be in right now.
Yeah, absolutely. You know, I think there is, you know, we always talk about authentic leadership, right? You know, so how do you, as a leader, you know, be transparent, authentic, you know, humble at the same time, and balance that, especially when you're dealing, you know, with not only a diverse, you know, sets of situations, but diverse sets of people, you know, from different backgrounds, multiracial and ethnic, and so forth. And how do you sort of maintain that authenticity, right, and that transparency?
Yeah, so this is, I mean, it's a great topic, Dave. We could almost do a whole podcast around this, because you know, and you can send your leaders an article I wrote that I got a lot of arrows in my back, because I think we're, as one professor said, we're at peak authenticity. Everything's about authenticity, and the word has lost some of its meaning. And I think particularly young people or certain groups take it too far in saying authenticity. You have to always show up with exactly how you're feeling in the moment. But, you know, going back to this example before, or if we go look at the example of rapper Killer Mike or Mayor Bottoms, I mean, they were brilliant. They're angry. They're frustrated. I mean, this is not the way things should be. And, you know, maybe authentically showing up and say, I have no idea. I think the whole U.S. system is terrible. But that's, you know, not what's authentic to that situation. And their situation is, you know, Keisha Lance Bottoms is the mayor. She needs to control the situation of what's going on. She is very clear on what she wants the end goal to be. People need to go home. Rapper Killer Mike needs people to be strategic, to mobilize, to organize. He repeats that phrase 3 times during his speech. And so, and I mean, let's be clear, Killer Mike says he doesn't even want to be there. He does not want to give that speech. So are they authentic to what the situation calls for, what their positions, what their duty is? Yes, and they say that. They're also authentic to saying, hey, I'm not going to hide the fact that anger here. You know, they are acknowledging that people are rightfully upset. And so, but, you know, other people may take this very rigid definition of authenticity and say, hey, you got to show up and tell exactly like what's on your mind. And let's face it, when you're in a crisis, you don't know. You know, going back to medical devices, I work with a lot of healthcare. There's a product recall. You may not know where that is. So if you have the leader show up and say, we have no idea what's going on, you immediately lose credibility. Now, that may be the case, but there are ways to reframe that and reassure people. Okay? We have the best team in the longest history and a fantastic track record. We have the best people working on this. They're going to get to the root cause, and we're going to solve this. That is reassuring to your stakeholders, to your employees, in this case, to medical doctors and patients. And let's be clear, as a leader, part of your job is to stay in your position. You know, if you get pulled down as a mayor or as the CEO, you no longer can get anything done, right? If you're fired. So, and again, I wanted people to really look at the way those 2 speeches in Atlanta, very powerful and stepping up, because there's a major vacuum in the way people are communicating, the leaders in the U.S. at least. So, you know, Mayor Bottoms has got control. She's got support of all those important constituents. You know, the people, the business owners, the people who got her elected, and she's going into a much better place to get things done over the 6 months, 2 years and beyond than a lot of other mayors who are defensive, looking weak right now.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, Michael, I think talk about a case study for effective leadership that has no playbook. I think you're right. I mean, there's nothing like that that's ever happened before, and whether you take the events in isolation or not, I mean, it's a global.
Let me just say, because I think that's a straight on point, but it also goes back to what I said before, is there's very good research, okay, that shows that anger is a powerful force, okay? We're often told, don't get angry because it's unproductive and it's rude, okay? But the research here shows people who get angry, they look powerful, and if they look powerful, they look confident. If they look confident, we think that they're competent, okay? This is just, straight up research, okay? You may not like them, but you view them as competent. And I see this all the time, with leaders when they need to go from senior director to VP to CEO, is can they show teeth? Are they assertive? Do they have a point of view? So we know that, and so that's why it's important to potentially use anger to show competence. However, and this is why I'm going to go back to that speech, we also know that it's a double standard. So if you are a woman, okay, you are a minority, and you suddenly get angry, okay, we know the things that get hurled about you, right? You are raging out of control. You are, the B word. And so women and minorities must navigate this. It's kind of darned if you do, darned if you don't. So, I show up and I show teeth, and I see this happen in companies, and then I get the feedback, they're uppity, they're too aggressive. That doesn't work. So you have to navigate that. It's tricky, but you can still do it. And the two of them down in Atlanta did it. They channeled their anger at certain things that we could all relate to: injustice in this country, legacy. Okay? And they also used powerful conventions with the way they spoke, hand gestures, and other things that created, these things came from the heart, but it's also very interesting to analyze. And again, that's broadly applicable. You could take those same principles to a female CEO presenting in a healthcare company during a crisis, to an oil and gas spill. And I think that's where I think the learning is. Situations are different, but you can still apply a lot of these principles.
Yeah, I think it at the heart of what you're saying, and it's something that I've seen throughout my life. It's authenticity. You have to show empathy, right? And then through that authenticity, empathy, there may be anger. There may be these sort of real human emotions, but it's things that are real that begin to build trust in people that you're leading, right? Because you're not only leading, but you're also learning from them as well too. And so there's a sort of back and forth and that give and take between the leader and those who are being led. There has to be that human empathy, that authenticness, and just trust.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, trust is fundamental, and I think this brings up a great point, Dave, which is this empathy and trust. And I want to bring this up because I think it's another issue I see during the crises, right? So this is the great man myth, right? That we look to the one person who's going to save everything or has all the answers. Okay. Well, yeah, right. That's not really the case. But what happens when we go a little too far and we believe in this, you've got to have all the answers, you've got to always show up in a certain way, is that we stop listening. We stop listening. And so here's what happens. You go around, with your employees when the pandemic unleashes, when this tragedy is raw and just unfolding. And you will go, some leaders will go, and they'll immediately start to give advice as to how people should be managing their work during this time. They think they know. And so I recommend the first question you should ask, and then you should just shut up and listen, is what's on your mind? great leaders will go through the organization. They will spend time. What's on your mind? You don't know. I mean, when we're in the pandemic, productivity, everything's been turned upside down. But, you know, your frontline employees, they're probably not thinking about work. Maybe they're thinking about their father-in-law who's in a nursing home and something's out, you know, an outbreak is going on. Or their kids, they got to manage a special needs kid at home. You don't know. So first, just ask them what's on their mind. It could have nothing to do, and meet them where they are. This is a key to empathy, because, you know, no one likes it when you just start hurling the advice and you've never even listened to what the problem is.
No, Michael, I think that also gets to the heart of what we used to call, work-life balance, and that there was this distinct separation between, physically, in many, many cases, going to work and then physically coming home, and that, the empathy and the bridge between what people were seeing and experiencing at work. Like, people didn't know if someone had a sick relative, or if their kid was having problems at school, or, fill in the blank of what we all experience behind the scenes. And now those worlds have, I guess, lack of word in English, like collided, I suppose, is what I could come up with, in ways where it was like a work-life integration. And to that point of how the shift will persist beyond the next month or two, as we're still kind of swirling around in this chaotic change, how do you envision, if you had a crystal ball, as to like the first steps of the new tentative steps into whatever our new reality will look like?
Oh, I wish I had a crystal ball.
Don't we all?
The new reality of work, of what's going on. Again, I can offer some of the things I think. First of all, and maybe this is good that I'm the token European here. I'm American, as you can probably tell from my accent, born and raised. But now more than half of my career and life has been outside the States, in Asia and Europe. And I would say, at least in Europe, this idea of like work-life integration, or the lack of work-life separation and balance that drives many parts of the US, particularly Silicon Valley, where you are, Dave, and definitely parts of Asia. I mean, that doesn't exist here. There's a much stronger separation, almost a humanity. I think we've lost it. Like, our work is our lives in the U.S. And certain other parts of the world. So I wanted to make that point first. The second is this kind of integration, or what might happen. As they say, a crisis is a terrible thing to waste. And I wrote an article recently also too about how constraints, we tend to think of them as boxing us in, but constraints often set us free. And what I mean by that is you have to do things differently. So it gives you license. And you can see this, right? Everyone is able to now, not everyone, let's more focus on white collar, but people are working at home, working remote. So suddenly, hey, does working remote work? They're able to spend more time with their kids or manage their own schedules. Now, that's been in place for a while, particularly in certain companies like tech, but it forced almost everyone to move to it more quickly. And there's good evidence that, people who have more autonomy or working on their own decisions do better. And so HR departments and companies never did it, but this suddenly forced them to. And so I have some hope that maybe that's opening people's eyes to, work life, how we get, more humanity or freedom for people. That won't be possible in every industry, but I think it's given us a big push forward. I think too, and this talks to a larger subject, is, we got a big situation in the States. There's growing inequality. There's deep set problems. And if you look at U.S. history, every 80 years is due for a systemic change. And hey, we're about 80 years from the last one. So I think some of those things will occur. And people are also, this importance, the pandemic just brings it up, is the importance of health. And if we're not taking care of ourselves, how can we possibly bring our best to work? And, if you're not healthy, that has a huge drag on workplace, stress and the bottom line. It hasn't necessarily been quantified, but we talk about these things that make companies inefficient. Stress, inability to take care of your kids because you're at work, you're doing long hours, you're not with them, you're outsourcing everything. Not healthy. So these things may lead to a correction. How it eventually turns up, we will have to see.
Michael, with that last statement regarding health, I mean, you really came full circle to how we open it up with leaders. If a leader doesn't take care of their own physical and mental health, then really a plane going down with no one at the helm. So I think that's like a great note to end on, with the caveat that I ask about the crystal ball, because what Dave and I are looking to do is not just have these kind of moment in time dialogues with thought leaders across industries or people like yourself who touch all industries and all sorts of who deal with all sorts of topics. If we could circle back with you in a couple of months and get your follow-up thoughts and kind of make this an ongoing conversation, we would certainly appreciate that.
Absolutely. I think that's a great idea. This idea of continuity and the discussion, because sometimes we will have a position and then new evidence will introduce itself that may get us to think in different ways. And the fact you're talking to a lot of diverse leaders, I think, is a fantastic conversation. So I'm more than happy to do that.
Excellent. Well, Michael Wenderoth, thank you so much for lending your time and your insight, and also for expressing your passion around all of that is going on today. And it was certainly very enlightening for myself, and Dave and I were very thankful to have you as a guest today.
My pleasure.
Thanks so much, Michael.
Thank you, Dave.
Take care.